Every generation of pilots believes they are the pinnacle, the masters of the air, the inheritors of perfection, and yet every generation forgets one truth written across the clouds since the dawn of flight. Arrogance is the first step toward falling. It began with laughter. Not the cruel kind, but the confident kind, the kind that comes from knowing your machine can outrun, outgun, and outthink anything that came before it. The F-16 Fighting Falcon was the crown jewel of modern air combat. It was fast, light, lethal, a symphony of titanium and code. Pilots called it the dream, and for decades nothing challenged its throne. Then someone, a historian, a veteran, or maybe just a curious soul, proposed a ridiculous idea. A test, a symbolic reenactment of history itself. They would fly mock engagements against a restored Spitfire Mach 9, the legendary British fighter that once guarded the skies of 1940, a piece of history against a weapon of the future. The young F-16 pilots laughed. "A toy," one said. "A museum piece." The word stuck. Toy. A beautiful relic meant to sit behind ropes, not fly against machines that could tear the sound barrier apart. But the older pilots didn't laugh. Some of them had flown older aircraft before, propeller trainers, warbirds in air shows. They knew something the young ones didn't. They knew that not everything in the sky could be measured in thrust or radar range. When the day came, the airbase buzzed with excitement. Cameras rolled, journalists gathered, engineers double-checked telemetry. It was supposed to be a friendly demonstration, a piece of theater for aviation enthusiasts. But to the pilots, it was a challenge, a test of pride. Captain Lewis Harding led the F-16 squadron, 28 years old, top of his class, confident and sharp. He had logged more hours in simulators than most Spitfire pilots had ever flown in their lives. To him, this wasn't a fight. It was a formality. Across the runway, the Spitfire sat waiting. Its elliptical wings glinted under the sun, almost mocking the angular perfection of the jets beside it. The aircraft had been restored by hand, every rivet polished, every panel singing of history. Inside sat a man whose name few recognized. Flight Lieutenant William Carter, 76 years old, retired RAF, a legend in silence. When the engine started, the air shook. The F-16's afterburners roared, splitting the air with thunder. The Spitfire's Merlin engine answered with a growl. Older, deeper, almost human. Two eras spoke to each other across time. At takeoff, the jets climbed effortlessly, vanishing into the blue in seconds. The Spitfire followed, slower, more deliberate, carving its way upward through the morning haze. In the control tower, technicians smiled. "This'll be over in minutes," one said. But they were wrong. The rules were simple, simulated engagements only. No weapons, only radar locks and maneuvering range. 5 runs, each scored by sensors. The first engagement lasted 43 seconds. The F-16 dove from high altitude, radar locked. The Spitfire vanished, no contact. The sensors failed to register a hit. The jet passed through empty air. Harding frowned. He's got nowhere to go. How the hell did he drop off radar? "Maybe the old systems can't reflect properly," his co-pilot said. "Maybe," Harding muttered. But in his gut, something uneasy stirred. The second engagement began. This time, Harding stayed low, using terrain to mask his approach. The Spitfire was visible now, a speck against the clouds. He throttled forward, Mach 1 slicing through the wind. The lock tone sounded, "Victory." But as he fired the simulated burst, the Spitfire rolled sideways, dodging with a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible. The radar blinked out again. Harding cursed. "Is he jamming us? No way. That thing doesn't even have a radio that works half the time." Below, the Spitfire danced. Carter flew not by instruments, but by feel. The wind told him where his enemy was. The light told him where to turn. Decades of instinct whispered through his hands. To him, the sky was not a digital map, it was a living creature. He could almost feel the jet above him, the pressure it left in the air, the tremor of its passage. He pulled the Spitfire into a tight loop, bleeding speed intentionally. The F-16 roared past, overshooting. In that instant, Carter climbed behind it. The impossible reversal. The control tower went silent. The sensors beeped, lock confirmed. The Spitfire had the kill. One of the engineers dropped his coffee. He tagged him. The old man tagged the Falcon. The radio crackled. Harding's voice came through, calm but tense. Control, confirm. Was that a lock? Confirmed, Captain. Harding laughed once, disbelieving. Okay, beginner's luck. Let's run it again. But it wasn't luck. By the third engagement, it became clear that something was wrong, not with the technology, but with the mindset. The Spitfire couldn't match the jet's speed or climb rate, but it didn't have to. Its unpredictability made the jet's sensors struggle. Its size and shape confused modern targeting software. It could disappear below radar, blend with terrain, use the sun itself as a weapon. Every run lasted longer than the last. The F-16s scored hits, but so did the Spitfire, not once, not twice, repeatedly. By the fifth engagement, silence filled the control tower. When it ended, the tally was unbelievable. Out of the full series, the Spitfire scored simulated kills in 68% of encounters. Someone whispered, "That can't be right." But the data didn't lie. Across the airfield, reporters waited for the pilots. Harding removed his helmet slowly, sweat on his forehead. He looked at the old man stepping down from the Spitfire, small, calm, smiling. Carter extended his hand. Harding shook it, speechless. Carter's words were simple. "It's not the machine that fights, son. It's the one who believes he can." That night, the headlines spread like wildfire. The toy that humbled the Falcon. What had started as a joke had turned into a lesson, and for the first time in decades, the world remembered that technology alone doesn't win the sky. Heart does. But what none of them knew was that this mock battle was just the beginning. The laughter was over. The challenge had only begun. The storm that followed was not in the sky. It was in the hearts of men. After the exercise, no one laughed. The base, once filled with confident chatter, fell into an uneasy silence. Screens replayed the footage on loop, the Spitfire vanishing into cloud, the F-16 overshooting, the impossible lock tone ringing again and again. Every pilot watched it, searching for an explanation. There had to be one. Maybe the sensors glitched, maybe the simulation was flawed, maybe luck, nothing more. But deep down, in the quiet that every pilot hides beneath bravado, they knew the truth. They had underestimated something they didn't understand. Captain Harding spent the night alone in the hangar. The Falcon rested beneath harsh fluorescent light, panels open, technicians working like surgeons around its metallic heart. It looked perfect, every line aerodynamic, every system flawless. Yet it had been beaten by something built before the first computer existed. He walked slowly around the aircraft, his boots echoing against the concrete. He stopped beneath the wing and stared at his reflection in the polished surface. "What did I miss?" he whispered. No answer, only the hum of cooling metal. Across the field, in a small maintenance shed, the Spitfire slept too, its silver wings dark under the shadows. William Carter sat beside it, running a cloth across the nose like a man tending to a loyal horse. The Merlin engine clicked as it cooled. He smiled faintly, as though listening to a secret. When Harding arrived, Carter didn't look up. "You shouldn't have been able to do that," Harding said quietly. Carter chuckled. "And yet I did. You cheated the radar. You broke the engagement parameters." The old man finally turned. His eyes were clear, sharp, but kind. "I broke nothing, Captain. I just flew." Harding folded his arms. "With respect, sir, Your aircraft is a relic. It shouldn't even keep up. Carter's smile widened. You don't fight the aircraft, son. You fight the pilot inside it. He tapped the fuselage gently. This old girl just listens better than yours does. Harding frowned. Listens? The air talks, Carter said. The pressure on your skin, the tremble in the stick, the song in the engine. You don't need a screen to tell you where your enemy is. You feel him. You smell him. You know when he's above you before he fires. The young pilot shook his head. You're telling me instinct beats technology? I'm telling you, Carter replied, that technology is only as good as the soul using it. The conversation ended there, but the words stayed. By morning, the story had spread beyond the base. News outlets called it the toy incident. Aviation forums exploded. Some called it a fluke. Others called it a miracle. The Air Force Command, uneasy about the publicity, ordered further testing, this time under controlled conditions. A full squadron of F-16s would run joint drills against Carter and the Spitfire in multiple environments. Low altitude, high altitude, and over sea. It was no longer a game. It was an investigation. On the day of the second set of exercises, the base looked different. There was no media, no laughter, no casual talk, only tension. The sky was heavy with clouds. Fitting, Harding thought. The kind of sky that tests men. The F-16s took off in formation, their wings slicing through grey mist. The Spitfire followed last, the growl of its Merlin echoing through the valleys. This time they didn't underestimate it. They came prepared. New radar calibrations, different approach vectors, every tactical advantage modern warfare could offer, and still the Spitfire slipped through their grasp. At low altitude, radar interference from terrain made their targeting unreliable. The Spitfire exploited every shadow, every gust of wind, diving and climbing with impossible precision. Its turns were tighter, its silhouette smaller, its flight unpredictable. When the jets fired simulated bursts, the older aircraft simply wasn't there anymore. At high altitude, where thin air should have crippled the propeller-driven plane, Carter found another advantage: patience. The Spitfire could stall gracefully, bleeding energy and forcing the jets to overshoot again and again. The F-16's speed became a liability. When the data came in, the result was undeniable. Out of 20 recorded mock engagements, the Spitfire had achieved valid firing positions in 14, 68%. Again, it wasn't coincidence, it was mastery. Harding sat in the debriefing room, jaw tight, staring at the numbers. Around him, the younger pilots argued, blaming the weather, the instruments, even the software, but he stayed silent. The realization was beginning to take shape inside him. The Spitfire didn't win because it was better. It won because it understood something modern combat had forgotten: rhythm. Carter flew like a musician. Each move flowed into the next, not in response to data, but to feeling. The Spitfire wasn't faster, but it was alive. It could dance. The F-16, for all its power, was a cage of control. Every movement filtered through computers, every command translated into precision. But in that perfection, something had been lost. Chaos, intuition, grace. Later that evening, Harding approached Carter again. This time, his tone was different. "You taught us something today," he said quietly. "But I still don't understand how." Carter nodded toward the horizon. "You ever play chess, Captain?" "Of course." "The Spitfire doesn't play chess," Carter said. "It plays jazz." Harding frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning?" the old pilot said with a grin. "You don't win by calculation. You win by feel, by improvisation, by knowing the rhythm of your enemy before he does." The young man laughed softly, shaking his head. "You make it sound like magic." "Maybe it is," Carter said. "Or maybe we just listened closer when the sky spoke." That night, Harding couldn't sleep. The data looped through his mind, but so did the sound of Carter's voice, steady, patient, certain. He replayed the footage, frame by frame, watching the Spitfire slip past every lock, every radar ping, every digital certainty. For the first time in his career, he realized he hadn't been flying. He'd been managing. Machines did the thinking, the adjusting, the compensating. He was only the operator. But the man in that old aircraft, he was flying. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted. And though he didn't yet know it, that shift, that crack in the armor of certainty, would lead to the unthinkable. Because within a week, the Air Force would authorize the ultimate test. Not a mock exercise, not a controlled drill. A full combat simulation, real weapons, real risks over open water. The pilots of the F-16 squadron would face the Spitfire one last time, and this time, pride would no longer be their ally. It would be their greatest enemy. The oceans stretched endless and grey beneath the morning sun, a perfect mirror for the calm before chaos. It was the kind of sky that could swallow sound, the kind that made pilots feel both invincible and very small. The air was cold and clean, the horizon empty, but somewhere out there, 2 generations of warriors were about to collide again. The mission was codenamed Operation Echo Sky. Unlike the earlier demonstrations, this one wasn't a show. It was classified, no media, no audience, no jokes. The purpose was simple and unsettling. Determine once and for all how a 1940s warbird could humiliate the most advanced dogfighter on Earth. His face was calm, but his stomach felt like ice. The brass had given them permission to use live weapon systems, only with locked safeties, of course. But the intent was real. No more exercises. This would be the closest thing to combat the world had seen between past and future. They launched at dawn. Above the roar, Harding's voice cut through the comms. "Remember, this isn't about pride." No one answered. The Spitfire launched 15 minutes later from a small auxiliary strip. Carter's takeoff was slow, deliberate. He didn't need data, he needed wind and instinct. The Merlin's deep growl rose like an ancient hymn. As he climbed toward the light, he whispered to his machine like an old friend, "Let's show them what ghosts can do." Within 30 minutes, the engagement zone was set. 30 miles of open air over the North Sea, with altitude caps and safety buffers. The F-16 spread in formation, radar scanning, sensors hunting. But the Spitfire didn't appear. Harding adjusted his systems. "Could any thermal? You should have contact by now." Then, faintly through the static, a voice, low, calm, unmistakable. "Afraid to look down, are you, Captain?" Through a gap in the clouds, a silver glint, the Spitfire, hugging the waves at 200 feet. "Son of a—" The airframe screamed as they plummeted. The F-16s locked radar, but each time they fired simulated bursts, the target vanished into the haze. The sea itself seemed to hide him. Below, Carter smiled. He knew its rhythm, its blind spots. Decades ago, he'd flown against German systems that weren't so different in principle. They too could be fooled by the right angles, the right timing, the right kind of courage. He pulled the Spitfire into a hard bank, turning into the sun. The light hit the ocean and reflected upward, blinding the sensors. The jets roared past. "Control, Falcon Lead. Lost contact again." Harding's voice cracked through the radio. The controller replied, frustrated, "You can't lose contact for 10 minutes. Nothing but static." The radar screens were clean, the sky empty. Then suddenly the alarm screamed. One of the F-16s had been tagged by the Spitfire S laser simulation system, a direct firing angle. "Falcon 2 hit." "Repeat, Falcon 2 tagged by visual lock," the pilot cursed. "How is that even possible?" Carter's laugh came through faintly on the open frequency. "You're too busy chasing numbers to feel the wind." The old man's voice carried a weight that silenced everyone. The F-16s regrouped. They were angry now, not at him, themselves. Harding tightened formation. He's playing with us. Break into pairs. Keep altitude advantage. But advantage meant nothing to a man who'd learned to make the air itself his ally. Carter dove into the mist again, using the Spitfire's smaller frame to vanish. He could hear them above, the deep, thunderous crack of jets slicing the clouds. He didn't need to see them. He could feel them, the tremor in the wind, the echo in the sea below. He waited. Then when the sound grew distant, he climbed. The Spitfire burst through the cloud layer directly behind Falcon 5. The old man lined up his shot, one heartbeat, one breath, and squeezed the trigger. Falcon 5 hit. Carter rolled away as the jets scattered. His radio crackled with laughter, not mockery, but pure exhilaration. "You're faster, boys, but you're flying blind." Harding gritted his teeth. "He's turning this into art," he muttered. By now, the base was controllers, technicians and officers stared at their monitors in disbelief. 2 kills. "Falcon 3 on me," Harding ordered. "We'll bracket him." They dove together. Below, the Spitfire vanished behind a rolling cloud bank. Harding followed, eyes straining, sensors pinging. Then suddenly, movement. A silver flash crossing beneath him, impossibly close. He rolled inverted and followed, his jet slicing through the air in pursuit. The ocean filled his view, blue and infinite. "Got him!" The radar lock tone screamed. Harding fired the simulated burst. A direct hit. The control tower erupted in applause, but it lasted only a moment. The Spitfire had reversed again, looping into a head-on pass. The systems registered a simultaneous hit, a kill for both. Mutual destruction. "That's impossible," he whispered. "It's always impossible, until it isn't." Out of 7 aircraft, 4 had been destroyed, 2 disabled, 1 survived. 68%, the same number again. When the simulation ended, both pilots landed in silence. Carter stepped out first, his face pale from the strain. Harding approached, helmet in hand. No words, just a handshake, firm and quiet. Carter looked him in the eyes. "Now you understand." Harding nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, I do." The Spitfire's engine clicked as it cooled, its metallic heart finally resting. The F-16 stood lined beside it, their surfaces flawless but humbled. That night, Harding stood alone at the edge of the runway, watching the horizon fade into darkness. The hum of the jets had died, but in his ears another sound remained. The low, soulful growl of the Merlin. It haunted him. Speed isn't strength, control isn't mastery, perfection isn't soul. The Spitfire had proven that flight, true flight, wasn't about domination. It was about connection, and the pilots who had called it a toy now knew they spoken out of ignorance, not superiority. But this lesson came at a cost. Because the higher-ups weren't satisfied with understanding, they wanted control. And soon, the experiment that had begun as curiosity would become something far darker. The morning after Operation Echo Sky, the hangars were silent. The air smelled of oil, heat, and disbelief. No one celebrated, no one spoke. The data told its story, and it was a story no one wanted to read again. 7 jets, humbled by a single relic of war. In the debriefing room, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Generals, engineers, and psychologists filled the room, eyes fixed on charts projected onto a pale wall. The results were irrefutable. The Spitfire had outperformed the F-16 fleet in maneuver-based combat by a consistent 68%. It wasn't possible, but it had happened. "What you're telling me," one general said slowly, "is that an aircraft designed before the transistor existed can still defeat modern airframes." "No, sir," the engineer replied carefully. "Not the aircraft. Command didn't like what they couldn't explain. It threatened structure. It questioned hierarchy. So predictably, they did what institutions always do when they meet something they can control. They tried to replicate it. A new order was issued. Operation Echo Sky would be repeated, but this time under enhanced experimental parameters, which meant higher risk, live ammunition on board. For realism, they said. Harding protested immediately. "Sir, that's not a simulation. It's controlled," they assured him. But deep down, everyone knew what it meant. They wanted to prove a point. They wanted the Falcon to win, no matter what it took. When Harding found Carter that evening, the old man was sitting on a bench outside the hangar, cigarette in hand, staring at the Spitfire bathed in the orange glow of sunset. "They're pushing it too far," Harding said quietly. Carter didn't look away. "They always do. They're loading live rounds. This isn't training anymore." The old pilot exhaled smoke, eyes distant. Then maybe it's time someone reminded them what war actually feels like. Harding clenched his fists. You could refuse. The words hit like a blow. By dawn, the operation was underway. The sea below was calm, deceptively peaceful. The F-16s launched in formation again, 6 this time. Carter took off minutes later, his Spitfire climbing slowly into the rising sun. The radio remained silent as they reached engagement altitude. The air was thin, cold, and unforgiving. "Control to all units. Simulations start in 3, 2, 1. The F-16s split instantly, scattering into the clouds, contrails twisting like scars across the heavens. The Spitfire dove into the chaos, its Merlin roaring against the thunder of turbines. Harding's HUD flashed as targets appeared and vanished in seconds. The old fighter moved like a ghost, there, gone, there, again. Harding caught the glint of sunlight off a wing and turned sharply. The Spitfire was climbing straight into the sun, the oldest trick in the book, and still the deadliest. The glare blinded his senses. "Can't get a lock." Harding's blood went cold. "Falcon 4, report!" The command center's voice was tight, confirming telemetry lost on Falcon 4. Harding's jaw tightened. God damn it! That was no simulation. Across the comms, Carter's voice came, grim and breathless. "That wasn't me. He fired first. The round detonated early." "Stand down," Harding ordered. "Everyone stand down now." But no one did. The air was chaos. Another explosion echoed in the distance. A missile warning system triggered prematurely. Pilots shouted over the comms. The sky filled with trails of fire. Harding pulled into a climb, heart pounding. "Control, abort mission. We've got active munitions." "Negative," Command interrupted. "Continue engagement. This is valuable data." "Data?" Harding shouted. "We're losing aircraft." Below, the Spitfire cut through the confusion. Carter's hands trembled slightly on the stick. The air was alive with danger. He'd seen skies like this before, real battle skies, where death hid behind every cloud. He recognized the feeling instantly, the smell of metal, the vibration in his bones, the instinct screaming that the sky was turning red again. He dove through a gap in the clouds. 2 F-16s followed, their afterburners flaring bright. His instruments flickered, the engine rattling under stress. He pulled hard into a turn, feeling the G-force bite into his chest. The jets fired flares, defensive, reflexive. One pilot panicked, cutting across his wingman's path. A collision. Harding screamed into his mic. "Falcon 6 is down. I repeat, Falcon 6. The explosion bloomed like a small sun. Only the hum of the Spitfire, steady and sorrowful. Carter's voice returned, soft. "You see now, son? Pride turns even the sky against you." Harding's eyes burned. He could see debris falling through the clouds. "We're aborting. Everyone out." Another warning flashed across Harding's HUD. Missile lock. On him. He dove, pulling the jet into a corkscrew. The missile passed, detonating harmlessly in the distance, but his systems were glitching. The sky was alive with alarms, smoke and silence. By the time the survivors made it back to base, 3 aircraft were missing, 1 pilot unresponsive. No one called it an experiment anymore. Carter landed last. When his wheels touched the runway, the world felt heavy again. Harding rushed to meet him. Their eyes met. No words left. From the control tower, a general watched, jaw tight. "We got our data," he muttered. But behind him, a young technician whispered the truth everyone else was too afraid to say. "They didn't lose to the Spitfire," she said quietly. "The storm came without warning. Not a storm of rain, but of silence. The kind that follows disaster, the kind that weighs on the chest and steals every sound." The runway was quiet, the hangars darker than usual. The acrid smell of burned fuel still lingered in the air. 3 F-16s had not returned. 1 pilot was confirmed dead, 2 missing at sea. The experiment that was meant to prove superiority had written itself into history as a tragedy. Captain Lewis Harding sat in the debriefing room, his flight suit streaked with smoke. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He'd flown through fire before, but not like this. Not against men who weren't enemies. The general spoke in clipped sentences, words that sounded like excuses wrapped in protocol. Equipment malfunction, command miscommunication, faulty telemetry. They blamed systems, not decisions. They said the data would be invaluable. Harding stared at the table. His reflection stared back, eyes hollow, uniform scorched. He'd followed orders. He'd done everything right. And still, the sky had punished them. Across the base, the hangar doors were open to the wind. The Spitfire sat alone, its metal skin blackened by smoke, its wings streaked with salt from the sea. William Carter stood beside it, motionless, head bowed. When Harding approached, the old man didn't look up. "You tried to warn them," Harding said softly. Carter's voice was gravel. "They don't listen to warnings. They only listen to wreckage." Harding exhaled, fighting the anger rising in his throat. 3 men are gone." "I know." Carter's hand brushed the fuselage gently, like a prayer. "The sky took them. It always takes the proud first." For a moment, neither spoke. The hangar creaked in the wind. The sea murmured somewhere beyond the dunes. Then Carter said, "You have to tell them the truth, son." Harding frowned. "They won't listen to me." "Then show them." He turned to the Spitfire, its canopy open, the smell of oil and salt hanging in the air. Harding understood before Carter even said it. "No," he whispered, "you can't go back up." Carter smiled faintly. "The sky and I have unfinished business." Harding stepped closer. "You're grounded, sir. You've done enough." "I'm not doing this for them," the old man said quietly. "I'm doing it for them." He pointed upward, toward the empty heavens, toward the names that would never be called again. Before Harding could stop him, Carter climbed into the cockpit. The Merlin engine coughed once, then roared to life, old, defiant, unbroken. The sound filled the hangar, echoing off the walls like a heartbeat. "Carter, shut it down!" Harding shouted, but the Spitfire was already rolling. The plane accelerated down the runway, its tail lifting gracefully. For a moment the sunlight caught the wings, and the silver bird rose into the morning air once more. It was the last flight of Flight Lieutenant William Carter. Control tried to raise him on radio, but there was no response. The Spitfire climbed higher, circling above the base, its engine a low growl fading into the clouds. Harding watched from the tarmac, the wind whipping his hair. He felt something break inside him, something old and sacred. Up there, Carter was free again. Free from bureaucracy, free from history, free from the numbers that had reduced flight to data. He wasn't flying for anyone now. He was flying because he still could. The clouds thickened, the wind shifted. For 20 minutes, radar tracked his course. One slow, deliberate spiral toward the sea. Then the signal disappeared. No distress call, no wreckage ever found. The official report called it pilot fatigue leading to mechanical failure. Harding called it something else. He called it a farewell. At the memorial days later, the surviving pilots stood in uniform, eyes fixed on the horizon. The chaplain spoke of sacrifice and duty. The general spoke of courage. But when it was Harding's turn, he didn't speak of duty or courage. He spoke of humility. "He showed us that the sky doesn't belong to technology," Harding said, voice trembling through the wind. "It belongs to those who dare to trust it." He paused, looking upward. He wasn't supposed to win. He was supposed to remind us why we fly. The crowd was silent. Some wept openly. Above them, a formation of jets roared overhead in salute. But as the sound faded, many swore they heard something else, a deeper, older note beneath the turbines. A growl, rhythmic and steady. The voice of a Merlin engine echoing through the clouds. That night, Harding returned to the hangar alone. The Spitfire's space was empty now, but the scent of oil and salt still lingered. On the workbench, Carter's flight goggles rested neatly beside a folded piece of paper. Harding unfolded it with trembling hands. In faded ink, the message was short. "Don't let them forget what the wind feels like." He sat there for a long time, the words burning into his mind. Somewhere deep inside, he made a promise that he would not let the story end as tragedy, but as a lesson. Days turned into weeks. The Air Force quietly buried the incident beneath layers of classification. Officially, Operation Echo Sky never happened, but pilots talk and stories travel faster than censorship. Soon, whispers began to circulate through bases and academies about the old man who had outflown the Falcons, about the ghosts that still lived in the clouds, about the day when arrogance met its reckoning and the sky itself wept fire. For Harding, the whispers became purpose. He spent every free hour flying, not jets, but trainers, vintage craft, even gliders. He wanted to feel again what Carter had meant, the language of the air, the rhythm of turbulence, the heartbeat of wings. He began teaching younger pilots differently. He told them not just about altitude or thrust ratios, but about silence, instinct, and trust. He made them close their eyes mid-flight and listen to the sound of the wind brushing the fuselage, to the way the plane spoke through vibration. And slowly, something changed. The new generation stopped laughing at the old machines. They began to look at them with respect, not as toys, but as teachers. Still, every year on the same day, Harding returned to the shore where the Spitfire had vanished. He would stand there in uniform, alone, watching the endless horizon. The sea wind carried salt and memory. Sometimes when the light hit just right, he swore he saw a glint of silver far out over the waves. A flash, a promise, a legend refusing to die. He never told anyone. Some stories are too sacred to explain. Because deep down, he knew the truth. The Spitfire had not been destroyed. It had simply gone home. At first, it spread quietly, a whisper between pilots during long nights in the ready room, a rumor shared at flight academies, a half-forgotten anecdote about an old Spitfire that humbled the world's most advanced jet. The Air Force tried to bury it under new missions, new data, new machines, but legends have a way of surviving bureaucracy. It began to surface in unexpected places. A young cadet at Edwards Air Base asked his instructor if the rumor was true. The instructor, a veteran of the early Falcon years, didn't answer. He simply smiled and said, "Every pilot meets a ghost one day." At another base, an F-22 pilot taped a photo of a Spitfire to his cockpit dashboard. He said it was a reminder to never underestimate a dream with wings. Some called it superstition. Others called it respect. Whatever it was, it began to change the culture of flight. For years, modern aviators had worshipped technology, the perfection of the algorithm, the certainty of data. But Carter's story, the ghost pilot, as they began to call him, reignited something older, something human. New training programs quietly incorporated what Harding had learned. They called it instinctive flight awareness, though everyone knew what it really was, learning to feel again. Simulators began including exercises with manual controls, forcing pilots to rely on intuition. Instructors told stories about the Spitfire, about a time when the sky was a battlefield of willpower, not hardware. And in every generation that followed, there were a few who swore they could still hear it, the faint hum of a Merlin engine in their headsets when the air was perfectly still. Harding himself became a legend. He never sought rank, never commanded squadrons. Instead, he taught, quietly, patiently. He was known as the man who trained with ghosts. His students described him as calm, almost prophetic. He rarely raised his voice, but when he did, it carried the weight of history. He told them that flying wasn't about control. It was about surrender, that a pilot doesn't conquer the sky. He earns its trust. One afternoon, decades later, Harding visited a museum where the remains of a Spitfire were being restored. The hangar was filled with the smell of dust and time. He ran his hand across the smooth metal of a wing, feeling the cold beneath his palm. A mechanic nearby recognized him. "You were there, weren't you? The Echo Sky incident?" Harding didn't answer. He just looked at the plane. The mechanic smiled nervously. "They say he's still out there, you know. Carter, flying." Harding's eyes softened. "He is." The young man hesitated. "You mean like a spirit?" "No," Harding said quietly. "I mean every time someone takes off and listens instead of calculating, he's there." Outside, a group of cadets practiced takeoffs in the distance. The roar of engines mixed with laughter, the sound of youth meeting the sky for the first time. Harding watched them for a long time before leaving. That night, he wrote in his journal, the same one he'd kept since the accident. His handwriting was slower now, but the words were clear. Machines will keep evolving, but the heart doesn't upgrade. It remembers. Years later, that line would be carved into stone at the Air Academy Memorial. Beneath it, a bronze sculpture of a Spitfire climbing into the clouds. By then, Harding was gone, but his students carried his lessons with them, lessons born not of manuals, but of memory. One of them, a young woman named Lieutenant Claire Morgan, would become the first pilot in decades to fly a Spitfire again in live combat training. She called her aircraft Faith. On the day of her first solo flight, the wind was strong. As she rolled down the runway, she thought of everything Harding had told her. She listened, not to the instruments, but to the rhythm beneath her seat, to the way the air pressed against the wings. At 3,000 feet, she smiled. "I hear you," she whispered. And for a moment, she swore she heard it back. The distant hum of another engine beside her, steady and calm. She banked into the sunlight, her silhouette mirrored by something faint and silver in the corner of her vision. She blinked, and it was gone. Back on the ground, technicians analyzed her flight path. "You had interference on comms," one said. "Some kind of feedback loop." But Claire knew better. The legend had found her. In the years that followed, her generation would redefine air combat once again, not through better machines, but through better understanding. They learned to merge instinct with innovation, to let emotion inform precision. They called it the Carter Principle. And though no one could prove it, every pilot who applied it felt the same thing, a calm that came not from confidence, but from connection. The Spitfire, once mocked as a toy, had become the symbol of humility, courage, and rebirth. No longer just a relic, it was a reminder that even in a world of machines, humanity still has a place in the sky. The story of Operation Echo Sky became mandatory reading at the Academy, though officially it never existed. The records were still sealed, the files still classified. But the myth carried more truth than any report ever could. Every year, on the anniversary of Carter's final flight, a formation of jets flew over the sea. And though the air was filled with thunder, sometimes, just for a moment, one could hear another sound beneath it, the soft rolling rhythm of a Merlin engine keeping perfect time. No one ever found the wreckage. No serial number confirmed, no trace of debris. Some said it sank, others said it simply disappeared. But the pilots knew better. Legends don't crash, they ascend. There are skies that never forget. Even when the noise fades, when the last echo of the engines dissolves into silence, something remains. A vibration, a presence, the memory of flight itself. The sky holds everything, every triumph, every loss, every heartbeat that ever dared to rise above the earth. And somewhere within that endless blue, the story of the Spitfire and the Falcon still lives. Years after the world moved on, the legend had grown beyond the military, beyond aviation, beyond logic. It became a parable, whispered wherever men and women looked up at the clouds and wondered what it feels like to truly fly. They said the Spitfire had been a ghost, that it had never existed, that the footage was fabricated, the records staged. But the ones who had been there, or who had been changed by those who were, knew better. The truth wasn't in the reports, it was in the silence that followed them. One winter evening, decades after the events, an old airfield in the English countryside reopened as a museum. Its hangars had been restored, the runways cleaned, the ghosts given new homes behind glass and light. In the center of the main hall, a single aircraft stood under a spotlight, a Spitfire polished to a mirror's glow. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Flight Lieutenant William Carter, the Ghost Pilot, 1918? No end date, because none was ever confirmed. Visitors came from every corner of the world, pilots, historians, children clutching model airplanes. Some came to see history, others came to feel it. Among them was Lieutenant Claire Morgan, now a commander herself. Her hair was streaked with silver, her eyes sharp as the day she first took off in faith. She stood before the plane in silence, her reflection shimmering across the metal skin. For years, she taught young pilots the same lesson Harding had passed to her, not through manuals, but through stories, through the sound of the wind, through the heartbeat of the throttle. And every time one of them asked if the story of Carter was true, she gave the same answer. Truth doesn't need permission to fly. That night after the museum closed, she stayed behind. The moonlight poured through the glass roof, painting the Spitfire in silver. She sat beneath its wing, eyes closed, listening. At first, there was only silence. Then, faintly, so faintly, she almost thought she imagined it, she heard it. The low, rhythmic hum of a Merlin engine, slow, gentle. Familiar. A smile touched her lips. "Still here," she whispered. The air stirred, lifting a loose page from a maintenance manual on the table nearby. It fluttered across the floor, landing at her feet. On it was a quote she recognized instantly, carved on the Academy's wall, written first by Harding, inspired by Carter. "The sky isn't conquered, it's inherited." She folded the page and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Then she stood, placed her hand on the Spitfire's nose and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the wind grew stronger. A gust swept through the open doors, and for an instant it seemed as if the plane moved, just slightly, as if stretching its wings. In the distance, thunder rolled, not the sound of a storm, but the echo of engines long gone. The next morning, the museum staff found something strange. The Spitfire's propeller, which had been locked in place, had turned slightly overnight, a few inches, maybe less, but undeniably moved. Some called it coincidence, others didn't. A few months later, during an air show dedicated to the anniversary of Operation Echo Sky, a formation of F-16s flew in tribute over the same stretch of sea where Carter had vanished. The sky was perfectly clear, not a cloud in sight. But as they passed the coastline, one of the pilots, a rookie on his first ceremonial flight, reported something unusual on his HUD. "Control, I've got a visual anomaly. Looks like another contact?" "Negative," Control replied. "You're the only ones airborne." But the rookie swore he saw it. A faint silver glint flying level with them, slightly below, matching speed for almost 30 seconds before disappearing into the light. He didn't mention it again, but when they landed he walked into the hangar, silent, pale and smiling. "What did you see up there?" his captain asked. He hesitated. Not what. Who? The story spread again, in whispers, in laughter, in awe. Some dismissed it as reflection, sensor error, trick of the sun. Others knew better. The ghost of the Spitfire had returned, not to fight, but to remind. Every pilot who heard the story felt it differently, some with pride, some with guilt, but all with wonder. And so the legend of the toy that defied the Falcons became more than a tale of machines. It became a mirror, a reflection of the eternal duel between precision and passion, between progress and purpose, between the machine that obeys and the soul that dares. Because the truth, hidden beneath all the data and reports, was simple. William Carter didn't defeat the F-16s. He awakened them. He reminded the world that the sky is not just a place above us, it is a part of us. It's where we remember what it means to rise, to risk, to believe. And long after the last Falcon lands, long after the engines of the modern world fall silent, there will still be that hum somewhere above the clouds. A Spitfire circling the horizon, waiting for anyone brave enough to listen. Somewhere up there, two generations still fly side by side, one made of fire, one made of faith, chasing each other through eternity. And when the sun dips below the edge of the world, and the light turns gold against the clouds, if you listen closely, you might still hear it. That sound, that heartbeat, that whisper that says, "The sky remembers."